So our next speaker is Joseph Spollen from Board Móna. Joseph manages the team responsible for the sourcing and delivery of biomass material to Edenderry Power Station. He holds a bachelor's degree in agricultural science from UCD and a master's of science from TU Dublin. He spent a number of years working in the renewable sector in the UK and Europe prior to joining Board Móna and his current role. He will be speaking today about the activating the solid biomass supply chain. Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks, Noel, and thanks to IrBEA for the opportunity to speak here today. Forward back. Thanks. Yeah, so I suppose, look, we would have heard a lot about Edenderry today and the transition and what we've been doing so far, but what I'd like to talk about is in terms of the actual supply chain and obviously where the fuel comes from, and I suppose what we've done over the years, the learnings that we've had over the years that we've been obviously in the biomass space, in the solid biomass space. So I suppose briefly, and you would have heard this earlier, we started consuming or burning biomass at EPL back in 2008, and yeah, right up to obviously January this year was the first when we got to 100% biomass at the plant. Obviously the volumes of biomass over the years would have increased considerably. Look, when we started, very much kind of a suck it and see approach and trying to understand the materials that were suitable for the plant, what type of materials worked best in the boiler, and looked at a variety of materials over the time. But I suppose in more recent years, understanding the chemistry in particular of biomass fuels really aligned us more to woody-based biomass products. Whilst our boiler plant is quite flexible in terms of material requirement, from a moisture and perspective and size and density perspectives, we have to be quite cognizant of what we're doing on the chemistry side of things. So I suppose in summary, it was primarily wood-based products that where we've resigned ourselves to for use in the plant. And yeah, look, I suppose it's primarily wood chips, but residues in particular from the forestry sector. And I think that's the point of the discussion today, is around that residue piece. You know, obviously there's a lot of discussion earlier was around biomass and how, you know, the perceptions out there, very much for what we're actively working on is that residue piece. The material that we're sourcing and utilising at the plant will be a byproduct of some other process, be it sawmilling sector, forestry operations. Yeah, so look, it's that real piece. I suppose I just want to make the point, and I know it was touched on earlier, in terms of IrBEA and what they've been doing for the sector, particularly the specified biomass harvesting. I do know the solid biomass capacity statement, but the document in particular, if you have an opportunity to get a copy, it's particularly relevant certainly for what we're trying to do in terms of promoting that brash recovery piece from forestry operations. Look, the guys have lots of experience over the years in looking at that, so it's a particularly important document for what we're doing. So yeah, look at. As I said, we have a number of different supply chains, and look, the photos on the right probably try to give some kind of an explainer. I think one of the guys mentioned earlier, like we've 140 plus suppliers at the moment in Edenderry, so it really does range from the large sawmill where we get the residues from, right down to the tree surgery and the smaller operators who are producing, relatively smaller amounts of material. But what we're trying to, I suppose, in terms of activating that supply chain, it's working with a wide variety. And I think there's probably lessons to be learned for even our colleagues on the biomethane side, is that it's not just one, in terms of supply, it's a multitude of suppliers that you have to try and aggregate and put together. Look, we'll talk later, but at the moment it's approximately 500,000 tonnes of material. To make that up is quite considerable, and you have to really put the feelers out quite a wide scale in order to capture that. I think one we just focus on here, and there is many others, particularly in more recent times around hedgerow recovery and stuff like that from agricultural operations, but in particular the ash dieback scheme. Obviously the situation around ash in the country is obviously a very negative one at the moment with the Phytophthora disease. Obviously a lot of the plantations are dying in front of our eyes, unfortunately. Look, I suppose it's a negative story, but from our perspective, we can turn that material into renewable electricity. which is a positive one. Look, it's very good fuel, it's very good material for us. I suppose a figure when I was just putting together the slides that opened my eyes, indicatively there's about 1 million tonnes of ash, diseased ash in the country. If we were to utilise that in the power plant, we're looking upwards of 108, being able to power between 180 and 200,000 homes for a year. So it's not obviously an insignificant amount of material. And look, it's a material that needs to be removed, and obviously for reforestation. So I think that's certainly where Eton Derry's the positive story around Eton Derry in terms of what can be done with the material that probably doesn't have another commercial use. Yeah, so in terms of our offtake, and I suppose when the plant was built, it was built obviously and situated in the centre of the peatlands for logistics reasons. But unfortunately, if I had my way, it'd be situated down in the west coast now, where we obviously have a lot more forestry density from a biomass sourcing point of view. So what we've tried to do is, and similar to other guys, is try to locate satellite yards for accepting material. We appreciate that a lot of the supply chain and obviously cost comes into this, that logistics plays a big element of it. It's low density material that we're trying to move. So what we've done is we've 8 log yards at the moment. We're hoping to expand that. We're really trying to move that into areas where it is obviously densely forested. As we know, the west coast is the more densely forested areas. So that's, I suppose, part of what, in terms of activating that supply chain, is trying to move to where the material is. As I say, the plant's not movable, so we have to move where the material is. So it's just another element of, I suppose, having that bit of adaptability and flexibility to be able to source the material that you're after. Look, I think it was touched on earlier. Look, anyone, obviously a lot of people here understand this graph and where we're going in terms of forestry output. I think Jean-Marc mentioned earlier, we're about, or maybe it was Gert, about 4 million cubes or 4 million tonnes of materials harvested currently. About 1 million to 1.5 million of that would be deemed to be residual material. Obviously a considerable volume. Obviously our output is due to increase. We know that the situation around where we obviously planted a lot of trees in the late 80s, early 90s that are now coming into maturity, and that volume is going to be hopefully realised. I think there's some issues there. Obviously the licence issue has improved. It's quite a fragmented forestry resource, but I suppose the long and the short of it for us and for our projections for looking at the plant, and obviously the guys talked earlier about the future of Eton Derry, we see a very positive future from output from the forestry sector. It's rising. Look, obviously reforestation or afforestation isn't where it should be at the moment, and we could point to that, but certainly over the next 10 years there's very much a place for residual, or we very much see that there's going to be considerable residual output coming from the forestry sector, and that's what we're trying to tap into. So look at, in terms of the sources, and it's once again looking at what's out there. Look, it's the top third of the tree that we're after in terms of pulp wood. Obviously wood fuel businesses here would be in the same position. But I think a metric that always I get it hard to get into my head sometimes is when a log goes into a sawmill, 50% of it actually comes out as residue. So it's obviously a considerable volume of material that's readily available, and something obviously that we focus on quite heavily in terms of being able to utilise that material. But it's that point around being looking at different supplies and attempting to aggregate those. I think it's particularly relevant to the biomethane sector that obviously been talked about today in terms of that supply chain. It's not just one size fits all. It's looking at a variety of supplies, be it the suppliers themselves in terms of scale, but also the actual materials you're looking at, and having that flexibility to be in it. And a key point for us is there's other off-takers for this material, be it board mills or other consumers, but I think our caveat is always that the gate is always open and we're always readily available to take that material. And I think that's really key when you're trying to move a supply chain and get people on board or get suppliers on board, is having that ability to offer flexibility. Obviously, payment terms and that type of thing is also critical. So yeah, look, I think it's learnings that we've learnt over a number of years in the supply chain. You know, I think for a number of years here we've been, you know, SSRH and the various on the solid biomass side, and you know, the questions I always asked: where are we going to get the stuff? Where's the material going to come for heating these potential plants? I suppose we can say, well, there's a 500,000 tonne requirements that's being serviced by over 80% locally sourced material here in Ireland. You know, it's there. It's really just, you know, I suppose promoting it, which obviously the guys are doing, but you know, it's not inconsiderable what's going on. But look, it's hard work. There's a lot goes into it in terms of working with people on a day-to-day basis and trying to make it, because look, as I'll talk about later, unfortunately the support where we're at for biomass isn't, you know, it can be tight enough margin for suppliers to make it work. Look, on sustainability, obviously something that's, you know, forefront in terms of the solid biomass question, and I'm sure the other vectors as well. But look, from Eaton Dairy's perspective, what we've been doing, obviously the discussion earlier around the Renewable Energy Directive and RED 2 in particular. Look, Eaton Dairy would be the first company in the country to have got SBP RED 2 accredited, which is a key is one of the voluntary schemes under that meets the requirements of RED 2. As part of that, we also became FSC Chain of Custody accredited. So, look, it's a challenge because, as I mentioned earlier, 140 suppliers, a lot of small suppliers that, you know, the paperwork side of things probably isn't at the forefront of what they do. So trying to aggregate that together and pull it together is a considerable job of work. What I would say, and we've been here before where the felling licensing would have been critiqued for various issues around delays, but when we were being audited, it was particularly noteworthy around how robust the felling license legislation here in Ireland is. So it's certainly a positive one that, you know, what we're doing from a sustainable forest management perspective here in Ireland is very, very strong. Certainly meeting, you know, very supportive of the RED 2 or meeting or often surpassing the RED 2 requirements. So I think that's a very positive one. I think what we're doing on that, in that regard, you know, it really, it's the bedrock of a solid biomass supply chain. So to have that there, whilst I was critical of it myself at times, owing to the delays and hearing from the sector, but it's a very, very important one to have it there. So look, we're not blind to the fact of sustainability, and I think that, you know, if there's any message to get out in particular around solid biomass, it is that, look, there's always more to do, and RED 3, as I think John Mark noted in his presentation earlier, is obviously coming down the track, which will be more onerous again. So look, there's plenty of work on that. I think obviously the carbon capture piece is something that can be really added to it. So that will really build that whole circular piece around. So yeah, so look, I think with the graph, and it's sometimes graphs going down aren't good, but in this case it is a good one. Look, as I mentioned earlier, 2008, why are we doing it ultimately? Look, our obviously very carbon intensive plant in 2008, 1 million tonnes of peat burned per year, down to obviously carbon neutral in 2024, and as you heard earlier, obviously hoping to go carbon negative in the years to come. Why are we important, and why in terms of grid? Obviously we're dispatchable, hugely important. We've obviously a lot more wind, solar, intermittent renewables onto the system now, so our presence is a very important one. I think that's acknowledged at all levels, and our ability to be able to ramp, our plant can ramp from 41 megawatts to 118 megawatts. So obviously when the wind's not blowing, that's a very, very important piece, and all obviously powered by biomass. Look, you've heard this numerous times, biomass in terms of job creation and the socio-economic piece is, I think there's no argument that it's the best renewable in that regard. Look, we put considerable in the region of between 20 and 25 million euro back into the local economies with local suppliers in Ireland on an annual basis, which is considerable for the Midlands region. So I suppose just where we're at now. So at the moment we're doing approximately 500,000 megawatt hours a year. So as I mentioned, between circa 600,000 tonnes of fuel per year, or energy tonnes of fuel per year. we've got a planned capability to be able to do 1 million megawatt hours. I suppose the context, 500,000 is about 120,000 homes, 1 million is obviously almost 250,000 homes. And why can't we do it? I think what we've shown earlier is the volume of material is certainly out there in Ireland, and it's only going one way in terms of increase. But look, it's the same story as we've heard earlier. It's around support. At the moment, Eton Dairy, only 30% of the maximum output of Eton Dairy is supported under the refit scheme. Refit is obviously very much at the lower end in comparison to our European colleagues in terms of support for biomass. Look, we're very much calling for an increase or an improvement to refit, or almost attempt to actually double that support. So, look, I think it's very much shown that what we've done is proven in terms of producing dispatchable renewable energy with biomass. So look, that's in terms of the call to action. That's what we're looking for in terms of doubling our supported output at Eton Dairy. In terms of look, this is our standard advert. We're always looking for, everywhere we go, we're looking for materials. So feel free to call over to the stand if you think you have any opportunities on that. And thank you, and thanks for your attention.